Hi, Tom.
Hey, Julie, good morning.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good and excited about this next episode.
Oh, me too. This one was so fun. We're really excited for everyone to listen. I want to start by thanking everyone for tuning back in to How They Do It, Tech in the Cities.
And I want to thank our sponsors, Uber, Spectrum, Civic Hall, TikTok, Google, DoorDash, and Snapchat. Thank you all for your generous support.
So this was a really fun episode. We did a little reporters roundtable with Annie McDonough from City and State, Jeff Colton from Politico, and Lydia Moynihan from the New York Post. I love talking to reporters about what's going on in the city and the state because I think they just, see across so many things.
Yeah, no, they were. I mean, I'm very partial to reporters, having been one early in my career. And Jeff Colton, even though he abandoned us for Politico, was with City and State for about 7 years. And no, they were fascinating. I mean, we talked about how AI is changing the political landscape in New York, which is really a fascinating and evolving topic. How they evaluate their sources that come to them via social media. We talked a little bit about City of Yes, which was obviously breaking news, and a little bit about the upcoming mayoral race, which is also kind of a fascinating topic.
Yeah, there's no shortage of subject matters. We could have gone for much longer. So I'm really excited for everyone else to listen to and hear what these really smart people who spend a lot of time following these issues had to say.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of City and State's How They Do It, Tech in the Cities. And I'm here today with my co-host, Julie Samuels. We're having an exciting panel today of great reporters around the city. We have our very own Annie McDonough from City and State. We have our ex-reporter, Jeff Colton over at Politico, and Lydia Moynihan from the New York Post. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So we're going to jump in. Julie, you want me to jump in the first question?
Go ahead.
Great. So we talk a lot about on this show about artificial intelligence and Governor Hochul's Empire AI initiative. How do you think AI is changing the landscape of politics in New York, and what's your prediction for the future? Has it had an impact yet? Jeff, you want to jump in?
Sure. I'll say one thing that I was dealing with just yesterday is I was in a city council hearing where they were discussing a new bill from City Council member Julie Menin that would basically ban the use of deep fakes, AI created deep fakes in elections. And that's been an issue that I've written a number of times about. It kind of came up because somebody had faked the audio or faked the voice of Keith Wright, the Manhattan Democratic leader, and had this fake Keith Wright insulting Assembly member Inez Dickens. And that's the kind of scary example that makes people worry about AI. Basically besmirching somebody's reputation by using AI. And so I can understand why there's been such a desire to address this legislatively. I know there's been some action at the state level similarly as well, although I don't believe anything has actually passed because it's a very difficult area to regulate because there's obvious free speech concerns. So this bill was introduced. I don't have a sense of whether it's going to move or whether it's just kind of going to be discussed. So that's one recent thing. Again, it was just released or just talked about at a hearing yesterday. This bill, and that's the negative use of AI. I hope there's also some maybe some other different uses how it's affecting government.
No,
Can
we're
I ask you
hoping
a
to help.
question? Let me follow up for 1 second. I was just having a conversation earlier today about this because there was so much debate before the election, the national election, about deep fakes in elections, about AI candidate usage, and we really didn't actually see that much of it, which I think is interesting. And I've been talking to a lot of people in the tech sector, like, is that like, did we overplay the concern or were we just a little early? And 2 years, 4 years from now, it's coming. Anyway, I don't know if you all have any thoughts on that. Some of the people I've been talking to are like, it was just early, like it is coming. That's just kind of an interesting angle that I've been thinking a lot about here.
That is interesting. And I remember there was so many conversations because we've had in recent history attempts for Russian disinformation, Chinese disinformation, or sort of an equal opportunity disinformation nation here. But yeah, I mean, I think I was pleasantly surprised, at least with X, and I think social media companies are aware that they don't want to get completely banned. They don't want to screw up so badly that no one ever uses them again. And so I think it's interesting, like the community notes feature has actually been fascinating for me to see. And I know people have very strong opinions about X, but I actually think that's like a very neat mechanism to sort of get a real time check on what's going on. And at least for myself, even like there's been so many things that I had seen circulating on the internet, and then I see them on X, and like there's all these community notes saying they're false. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I would hope from a positive perspective that yes, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think this is going anywhere. And I do think we've seen already, remember when there was a photo of showing an explosion of a government building and the market dropped briefly on that. So I think there are those instances, but I'm cautiously optimistic that people are also going to be innovative about addressing them. And I think the community notes is sort of one example of that. But it's better to err on the side of caution and warn that this is an issue, because it has been and it will continue to be.
Yeah, I think maybe being early on it, if that's the case, isn't a bad thing here. If companies and also all of us following these races are on top of it. I mean, I think it's tough for journalists too. We've had issues with lawmakers using ChatGPT to communicate with us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's a huge problem, and we're learning how to deal with it too. But or I should say, it's a scary threat. I don't know it's a huge problem right now. To your point, Julie, and Keith Wright is a good example of it showing up in the local space. But I hope it doesn't become a huge problem in the future. And I hope that sort of the companies and all of us are prepared to figure out how to take that on.
Can I ask you guys one more follow-up question on that? There's kind of two angles to this, and most of the debate we've had in the city and the state, and frankly in the country, has kind of been about like the Keith Wright example, or the international interference, Lydia, like you were talking about, which is really kind of like using social media to get directly to viewers, to voters. But you all are intermediaries, right? You all write stories, you have sources, you do your own research. Are you guys thinking about how to ensure that your sources, Annie, you talked about this, that you've had sources use ChatGPT, but have you all been thinking about ensuring that your sources are actually your sources or are real?
Yeah, to me, this rarely comes up. I'm not particularly. It hasn't been a particular concern that people would be, faking or spoofing information from sources or from elected officials. Maybe that is something I need to worry about. It's just not something that's on the top of my mind. I think because, like you said, we just seem to be a little early on the deep fake revolution, at least when it comes to politics. Obviously, it's all over the internet, but it feels like it's not being used much at all yet for actual political communications. And, maybe I'm naive, but I think that's not an active concern yet in my beat.
I mean, that is a terrifying thought, and it's an interesting question. I think in this case, it's kind of like we go through cycles, right? And so everyone's talking about the next technology, and I think having the oldest technology is good. I think like meeting somebody in coffee, Julie, as you and I did originally, or getting on the phone. And I think that's the best reporters, and that's why you need reporters, right? Because they're actually there. They're seeing what's happening with their own eyes. They're not just like lurking on the internet, right? And so I think it's interesting that kind of the tools that made somebody successful 50 or 60 years ago in journalism are still not just relevant, but arguably more relevant today than they've ever been. Like actually, as a journalist, vetting people who you can trust. And I think it's so interesting because on the one hand, I think free speech, the internet is so important. And I love seeing that people can put their thoughts out there. The flip side, though, is, and I just see this in a microcosm with my family where we have a group chat. And I swear to God, every other text that somebody sends is like very objectively like conspiracy theory laden. And so it's funny because I always chime in and like, well, here's the context, right? And even my brother, he kind of goes to me, he's like, send me a TikTok video. And I'm like, he's like, is this true? I don't know how to vet it. And so I think people keep saying like, oh, well, social media is going to replace journalists. And, everyone's a journalist now. And I think if anything, the fact that there is more information out there means that journalists are needed more than ever to vet, right? Because you do need to trust and to verify. And part of the journalistic process is calling for comment, calling somebody and giving them an opportunity to explain what's going on. And so I think that process, we need more now than ever. And I think it's sort of this, I feel like you either see the media, the traditional media, who's very opposed to X and Facebook and all these new platforms. And then you see sort of a lot of people on these new platforms saying like, oh, media is dead and it's horrible. And it's like, no, actually, the premise of media is super important. And we need that now just as much as we've ever needed, if not more before, because we need people to vet all of those crazy things that are flying around online. And so I think in a way, it is a new kind of job that we're doing, but it's needed just as much now as it always has been.
One hopeful thing I've seen, I think to Lydia's point, for us, meeting sources in person and being there in person is a very good way to make sure that we're verifying the information that we're receiving. I think like at a broader scale, outlets that are covering information that's actually passing on social media. I've seen like CBS News hired a whole fact-checking team really to focus on this. I believe it's called CBS News Confirmed. I thought that was really interesting that they're putting real resources into fighting this stuff. And maybe it's, preparing to fight or to make sure that doesn't become a big problem. But at a sort of more national news scale, that's, I think, encouraging to see.
Do you find sources on social media sometimes? I mean, do you hunt people down on LinkedIn or Facebook?
I constantly do. Yeah, definitely. Finding sources on social media and then sources finding you on social media. I know, I'm sure all of us have had, somebody that we don't know reach out to us over DM, whether it's on X or Instagram or LinkedIn or anything. That happens constantly.
I mean, not to be redundant here, but how are you sure you're not being catfished by those people?
Well, you have people who refuse, who, when you say, hi, thanks for reaching out, can we meet in person, who drop the line of communication. And that's not a good sign. And that's maybe someone who you don't carry on a relationship with.
Do you guys get your news on social media?
I get so much news on X, and I just joined Blue Sky this week. I'm trying out the alternative to X as well. Yeah, constantly. It's still a huge and important source for, it's just all the information all in one feed. So even though people...
Has it changed as a source since Elon Musk bought it?
It hasn't changed as a source for me. I think that, because what I think is interesting about getting information from X is what lawmakers say on it, for example. And I don't think their use has really changed a bit. Using it has been different because I think you get a lot of spam and stuff that you're not interested in following. So it's been less pleasant to use. But I think, to Jeff's point, seeing how council members tweet or, post on X is sometimes, or interact on X, is sometimes where stories come from. And I have not worked in this field pre-social media. So I wish that I had, and I'm curious, what that would have been like, but this is sort of the reality right now.
I'm not great at this, but I do sense among some of my colleagues that there's a real hesitancy to sort of, I think they would say give social media credibility, but it's where information is out there and basically coalescing in such an interesting way. And especially for breaking stories, I think that's where it's helpful because you can kind of sift through so many different things that are going on all at once. The other thing too that I found is at a certain point in the night, I'm I can't read any more news. I want to turn the TV off. I don't want to read another article. And yet I will go on Twitter, and I guess, I don't know why, I am just super addicted to it, but I'll do that for fun. And I often, since I am spending so much time on Twitter or now X, I feel like I glean more from that because I think of it as kind of almost a relaxing, in a weird way, thing. So I think it's an important source, in that regard. And people do, you hear about people getting married, from DMs on Twitter. So I do think you can actually use it as a forum to broker an introduction.
I'm going to show my age here for a second and bring up Facebook. Are each of you friends with legislators or people in Adams administration or the Hochul administration on Facebook?
Not
Do you
on
guys even
Facebook.
use Facebook? That's what you have to ask first.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, we had a reporter years ago, Laura Namias, who's at Bloomberg, who broke a story via Facebook. She actually friended a legislator and broke a great story. Jeff, you probably remember that story, right? So
What
I'm
was
just,
it? Do you remember?
Jeff, do you remember the details of that story?
Sadly, no, I don't know.
Yeah,
I remember it happening, but I don't remember.
I think it was a legislator like bragging about something on Facebook that was like either illegal or unethical, and she outed him from that. And then I think he actually either lost his next election or there was some serious consequences from that story. It was a great story, but she friended him, and that's how she got the information. And I just wonder if, again, you know, I mean, I assume elected leaders and people in government are just like us. In their stupid moments, they say stupid things on Facebook and Twitter. But you know, obviously, you have to be friends with them on Facebook to see that. So I'm just curious if you do that as a way to sort of get a lens into their lives.
I think it's not so much Facebook, but my colleague, Holly Pretsky, who's our city editor, wrote about how Chiose is using TikTok, and he was big on TikTok during the broker fee bill. But there's questions about whether he's mixing his government account with personal political purposes. There are strict ethics rules in the city for that. And so sometimes the story has to do with how officials are using social media. I mean, Jeff and I wrote about Eric Adams being on Signal in his early administration days. So that's sometimes the story. And I think that what Holly's really great story about Chiose shows is that they don't know how to navigate some of these rules yet. I think that they're still figuring that out.
Yeah, I still use Facebook I don't use Facebook for like my personal life, but I use it as a reporting tool. There are still, a lot of elected officials or organizations that post information, sometimes exclusively on Facebook. One example is Assembly Member Bill Colton, who represents Southern Brooklyn. He's in his 70s, and that is his social media. And he posts a ton of interesting political content on Facebook. And he was in a really competitive election this year. You know, he was supporting some other candidates in competitive elections. And so when I wanted an update on what was happening in the Southern Brooklyn Assembly and Senate races, I would go to Bill Colton's Facebook. And I'm not his friend. He just posts it publicly. So that was helpful. Yes, exactly. It's spelled differently than me. We're not related, but you know, he always has a special place in my heart because we have the same name.
I would have to guess that, I mean, you know, we don't really cover Congress, any of you guys, but if you're covering Congress, I think Facebook is probably more fertile ground than Twitter is, or X. Anyway, next question. Julie, you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, some of the, you know, actually, as we're recording this, which it will be old news by the time this is being listened to, but the council is voting on City of Yes right now. And I'm just kind of curious what you all think. This is to anyone who wants to take it. Maybe Jeff, if you want to start, like, how did we get here? Is this a big deal? How big of a deal is it? I mean, I have my own opinions. I think it's great, but I really want to hear kind of what you think.
Yeah, the whether City of Yes is a big deal has been kind of the question, because the mayor and the city council are, you know, saying this is enormous and you know, one of the biggest citywide zoning overhauls in the city's history. And that's true. It is one of the biggest citywide zoning overhauls in the city's history. However, there's widespread agreement that this is not nearly enough to address the housing crisis. At least for those who acknowledge that New York City has a housing shortage, you know, this whole City of Yes plan will potentially maybe result in approximately 85,000 new units over the next 10 years. And that's a drop in the bucket. You know, there's a theory that we need, you know, maybe 800,000 new units in the next 10 years for New York City to kind of keep up with the demand, keep up with the population growth. So City of Yes is both a really big deal and also, many would say, not a big enough deal. But politically, it's interesting because it represents kind of a moment that both Adams's speaker and mayor are working together on something and not working on something that isn't without controversy. I mean, they're both kind of sticking their necks out on something and working together. So it's been very interesting as a policy and as a political effort.
Yeah, I agree with that whole analysis, but I think an additional layer, it's a big deal for the mayor who needs a policy-driven story right now, and he needs a policy to run on. He hasn't been doing a whole lot of official campaigning at all, and not joining any of the forums that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. So we don't get to hear him like talk about City of Yes at a housing forum just yet, for example. But we probably will in the future. And I think every second he's not talking about his legal issues or Trump going forward, I think is going to be important for him. So it's a political victory for him, I think.
When you talked about how 85,000 new units is a big deal, but it's not nearly as big of a deal as the city actually needs. I think that dynamic, it was largely at play in the presidential election. This idea that even when government feels like it's doing big things, I think it doesn't feel nearly big enough. And those of us who follow politics know that this was a big deal. Like getting this done was not easy. But if you just like read the news and don't follow politics day to day, you're like 80,000. But we all understand that they really pushed a boulder up the hill here, and that's great. It's like that disconnect, I think, is really at play all over the country and in New York specifically right now. Lydia, you kind of look at, I think, more of this kind of bigger picture stuff in your reporting, and I'm wondering, like, I'm not exactly sure what my question is. There's obviously a question in here somewhere, but really thinking about the perception of politics from outsiders versus the people who like follow the day to day, and how we can like better get to a shared understanding of work from it feels, I guess what I'm saying, like people who are in politics and people who are totally out of politics are working from two totally different planes right now, to me.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, I think it's funny. I think a lot, especially covering like more finance and tech here in the city, I think a lot of those people are frankly very removed from the realities. Like they'll complain about the potholes or this or that, but like for the most part, they're living in luxury buildings and like they're not taking the subway. And so I do think that there is a division. Obviously, we all know that in New York between the very wealthy and the rest of us who like take the subway every day and pay our rent and are kind of just doing our best to get by. But I think there needs to be more of an interest in the local politics because it really does for everyone. It affects your life in a much more significant way, I think, than any sort of federal policy, right? Like all of these local issues are things that affect our safety and our day in and day out. So I think a lot of more elite people, like they want to have a relationship with the mayor. They want to kind of like have that connection and say that they know him and try and call in favors if they can. But I think, at least for myself, this was one of the first elections too where I really tried to read up on everything because I realized I'm like, okay, yeah, the city's changed since COVID. I want to make sure that the things I'm voting for and the things that are actually impacting me or things that I'm aware of and paying attention to. But yeah, I think people are just so busy and they turn on the news at the end of the day or they check it and it's really just like a handful of whatever is deemed to be the top story of the day, which again, whether a random person is confirmed for a post, frankly, is not going to impact our lives. So I think the more that people can pay attention to these local issues, the more they can actually do to impact their lives and the lives of others.
We've got a mayoral campaign coming up, right? I mean, it's probably started already. Forums already happening. Any of the candidates so far stand out in terms of their, knowledge of technology or stances on technology policies that you think will distinguish them from the rest of the pack? Annie or Jeff, I know you guys cover City Hall, so you may have a better read on this.
I'd love to do a technology forum with all the candidates because right now,
Annie, I've got a plan for that. Don't worry.
Okay. Right now,
we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it.
Okay. I don't know.
By the way, Julie, that could be our next podcast series. Could be the mayoral candidates.
I think everyone is still articulating their policies. I mean, we just heard a big housing plan from Zellner that Politico covered. And I haven't heard major technology policies from the main candidates here. But hopefully we will, because I think that how the city and state use tech and how they work on projects like Empire AI and I mean, everything that you guys have covered in this podcast is incredibly important. And lawmakers not knowing how this stuff works that they might be regulating or welcoming in or not welcoming in is a big problem.
Yeah, I'd say the most tech forward candidate is our mayor right now. I mean, the Adams loves to use new technology, especially for the NYPD. We've seen the drones and the DigiDogs. And, he reminds us all that he used to do like computer coding for the NYPD. And speaking of artificial intelligence and deepfakes, the mayor faked himself speaking Chinese and Spanish and Yiddish in that robocall last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, which became a really big deal. The mayor himself loves to embrace technology. I can't say how he has been like policy wise, but as far as like interest and desire, he's all over it. So it'll be interesting to see if any of the other mayoral candidates really try and center that or even talk about it or kind of let the mayor own that ground.
Unfortunately for him, he hasn't taken his pay in crypto for a while, though, right?
He took the first
I was
three
thinking
paychecks.
about that.
The first three paychecks.
First 3 paychecks, right?
Well,
And
he held on to it.
he did. I saw it in the news today. He did, and it's done very well. That was
Oh,
a
is that-
He
good
was bragging.
investment.
Yes, he was bragging that his crypto investments have hit an all-time high. It's crazy.
I have
Interesting.
two quick things to say to that, and there's a question in the second thing. The first thing I just wanted to say was an observation that in the presidential election, do you know what did not come up at all? AI, not at all,
Right.
which is crazy. I could not believe it. I mean, in every in the debates, like it was like as if that's not even an issue. It was madness. So it's really, your point is really interesting and really well taken. That so far it's not really coming up yet in this mayoral election either.
Okay.
Though who knows? We're still very early. We're very early in the cycle.
One thing that happened in the presidential that I wonder whether it'll filter down in the mayoral is the way that the candidates campaigned or spoke to the public, right? There was a lot more. I mean, obviously, the president-elect did a lot more podcasts than Kamala did. Do you think that's going to become a bigger campaign medium going forward for local candidates, or how will local candidates in this upcoming campaign employ digital technology more? Have you seen any indications of that?
I would hope that most of them like have sophisticated digital campaigns and the sort of resources to lead those, because I think it's been a while where you could have a campaign that totally ignored social media. I think we've seen Zoran do like some of the viral TikTok like interviews and stuff like that so far. There's that Subway interview, right? The guy who interviews Subway riders, I think he did. But I don't know about podcasts. I think the mayor's approach is going to be really interesting to see who he talks to when he's officially campaigning versus not campaigning, and versus just speaking to reporters in the blue room as mayor. But it is a little bit early, I guess, and we still have to see how that rolls out.
Although I'll say that Zellner Myrie talked on a sneaker podcast last week. It's not about politics; it's about sneaker culture, and he's a sneakerhead, and so he went on and he reached there, and I'm sure that he reached some voters who don't follow politics, but they do follow sneakers. So that was a pretty interesting move by him, and I'm sure that there will be a lot more of that from the candidates as time goes on.
Do you think any of the candidates might hire Barron Trump as a consultant on politics?
The way that the mayor Adams is moving, I wouldn't be surprised if Eric hired Barron Trump to be a consultant.
It certainly worked for the president. Should we jump into public safety? We obviously had a very high profile incident yesterday with the execution style shooting of the United Healthcare CEO. What are your thoughts on how technology and AI can be used to enhance public safety, or is the mayor doing enough? Is the governor doing enough? Is there something that could have been done yesterday to prevent that using technology?
I don't know the answer to the last question, but I think that the MIPD has a pretty sophisticated, or at least expansive surveillance system, the domain awareness system that Jesse Tisch majorly expanded when she was at the MIPD, is part of that. And I mean, just like as a layperson looking at a lot of the surveillance videos that they've caught of this shooter on the city, it's probably going to be important to eventually, finding him. But I think bringing in Jessica Tisch, who had this tech role, this IT role at the MIPD, having the mayor, who, as Jeff pointed out, is pitched himself as the tech mayor, at least, and has bought into the drones and the robots and DigiDog and all that. I think that is a very conscious choice by him to, if not expand, then continue to try to have MIP at the forefront here. Whether they're actually achieving that, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I think New York is adopting the technology we have. I think it's not really an issue though of technology and AI, although, Adams clearly seems to be exploring how to best apply that. I think it's sort of a boots on the ground issue. And like, do we have enough police and do they feel empowered to actually take action and protect people? Because the crimes I think most people are worried about when they get on the subway aren't really things that could be stopped at this point by technology.
They could be, if you're saying there should be more technology in the subways.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think like necessarily surveillance or a DigiDog is going to protect somebody on the subway potentially if somebody tries to push them in front of an oncoming train. I think technology can help, but I don't think that's the solution necessarily.
Right.
It's interesting to think about because the mayor obviously ran his last campaign really focused on public safety. It's obvious that public safety is going to be a major issue in this campaign, and is a major issue in general. The thing that's complicated about the politics around public safety is like you can list all the stats about crime going down, but if a voter feels scared for whatever reason, the stats really don't matter. And so, it's going to be interesting to see some of these candidates at least are going to try and outdo each other, I think, on the public safety side. And a lot of that will center around tech, like you all are saying. It's an interesting dynamic.
Imagine if you had surveillance in every subway car. You could have like the voice of God coming in there, if somebody's acting up or something like that. That would be like putting a
There's been talk of having, even not cameras in every car, but just cameras in every station. And I think the answer to that is always like, it's simply too expensive. It would be impossible to even consider the logistics of having cameras in every station and cameras in every car. But as technology moves on and becomes cheaper, things like that, I guess, become more realistic.
Well, we all have cameras in our pockets, right?
Right.
Like these crimes all get recorded.
At one point, there were police departments around the country that were buying this facial recognition technology. I'm blanking on the name of that company that was very controversial. But is that something that is
Clearview? It was Clearview AI.
Clearview AI, yeah. It's a former actually Giuliani official who started that company, or what was one
It
of the
all comes full circle, guys.
He's somebody actually who did some work with City and State a number of years ago. Anyway, do you think that facial recognition technology is something that the city is going to adopt or is going to look at? That seems to be something that's starting to catch on in other places.
The NYPD uses facial recognition to some extent already. They have to be more transparent about how they use it now after the city council passed a surveillance oversight bill. But there's not controls on how they use it currently. They just have to tell the council and the public what kind of tools they have and how they use them.
Which is one that gets people really touchy. I mean, everybody likes fighting crime, but it's, that's, I think, a civil liberty that people are very concerned about. Just this idea of being tracked everywhere you go with facial recognition. It's really, I think right now, it's something that largely turns off the public, and it's going to be quite a lift for city government or whoever if they want to expand this technology, if they want to use it more, to sell it to the public, to explain why it needs to be used. Again, as Annie said, it's already being used, but to expand it and to use more facial recognition, I think would raise a lot of concerns, both by the civil liberties groups the NYCLU, but also just by everyday New Yorkers.
We're sitting here December 5th, we're 3 weeks out, a little more than 3 weeks out from the new year. We'd be remiss in not asking this intelligent group of reporters, what are the 2025 stories you're anticipating or looking at? What do you think are going to be the big issues next year?
Are we going to talk about anything other than the mayoral election in New York City?
I think Trump and how he interacts with the mayor and the governor is, apart from the mayoral election, which is huge, obviously, I think how the mayor carries out these the first 6 months where he is running for re-election, currently going to be having a trial a couple weeks before the primary, but also working with an incoming administration that he's been remarkably friendly to so far, especially when it comes to what Trump's deportation policy is going to look like in New York and how it's going to affect undocumented immigrants, including the many asylum seekers that have come through in the last couple of years. That's a huge question mark, and the mayor has said recently and said in the past that he wants to see an allowance for more cooperation with ICE to deport people accused of crimes, not just convicted. And what that actually looks like in practice is what I'm going to be watching for, I think.
A lot of optimism that SALT deductions could be reinstated. Trump's signaled that that's something he would support, and obviously those tax breaks are going to have to be renegotiated and reinstated since they sunset next year. So I think that's something that's been a huge issue for a lot of representatives from New York and New Jersey. And so some optimism that could happen. And I think, at the time that those were dissolved, a lot of people were like, oh, that's what caused the exodus to Florida. I don't think that was the only thing. But I think that could be really positive for New York if those were reinstated. I think that could give the economy a little boost.
It'll make Tom Suozzi and Josh Gottheimer very happy. Jeff?
Do you guys think?
Yeah.
Wait, I want to hear what Jeff has to say about 2025, and then I have a question.
Oh, sure. Well, then other than the mayor's criminal case, of course, which we'll all be watching closely, and every New Yorker, I think, will be following. I'm also interested in the new police commissioner. Jessica Tisch has talked all about how she's going to use technology for the NYPD. And, as the second woman to ever lead the department, and the department is at quite an interesting time, I'm definitely going to be closely following her leadership. And yes, whether the PD does expand its use of technology or use it in different innovative ways. So a couple of things I'll be looking at in the upcoming year.
I have a quick prediction question for 2025. On January 6th, which I think is a Monday, will there be congestion pricing?
I was wrong.
Jeff is
Yes.
laughing. Wait, Jeff is laughing. So why?
I think it's a fair question because it is definitely up in the air, but I think it will happen. I think that right now everything is in place, and I think I don't think a judge is going to stop it in the next month. I think it will be in place on January 6th. Whether it lasts forever after that is an even more difficult question.
I hope it will be. I'm on team congestion pricing for sure.
Do you agree, Annie and Lydia?
I think it's going to happen. We wrote a story back in May. Congestion pricing is finally happening. Obviously, it didn't go that way. So I'm a little bit hesitant. I do think that, there are lawsuits, so that's a challenge. But as far as Trump's ability to stop it, I think the governor, the MTA, the advocates have sort of done what they can to get it in under the wire under Biden. It's going to be more difficult for Trump to stop it once it's already in place. Not impossible, I guess. Anything could happen, but whether he puts his attentions there as opposed to everywhere else, I don't know if that's going to happen. So I'll say I think so. January 6th.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's going to be something that Trump is focused on fighting. And typically, once taxes are instated, they stay there. They rarely has a tax been instated and rolled back. And I think, my understanding is kind of always the plan. So I think they're being very strategic about getting it in, and I don't think that there's any possible way it gets stopped.
One last prediction question, and this is about somebody who I think still uses a flip phone and doesn't use email. What is Andrew Cuomo going to be doing in 2025?
I mean, the idea has been that his opening is Eric Adams not being in the race, right? That's looking less and less likely that Eric Adams will not be in the race. He seems to be in it. He seems to, be ready to run for re-election again, and he's not being removed, as was talked about several months ago. So I think it's about whether Andrew Cuomo wants to sort of take Eric on or hold out for a 2026 run. I don't know. The field is very unset from my point of view, and I'm prepared for it to fluctuate and change as far as the mayoral race goes.
I think he's still beloved. I think people still resonate with his leadership. And, I still remember all of those briefings during COVID where I would kind of be doing my work and have him on in the background. And so I think it's really a question of what he wants to do. But I think people still really like him and have pretty fond memories of his time as governor. So I think if he wants to, he has a good shot.
The New York Post gets behind him. If the New York Post was pretty influential in electing Eric Adams. You're sitting either in the office or at least you have a pipeline to the New York Post. What does the Post mean to Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo in 2025?
I have no idea. I think they'll cover the story and cover the facts and be fair. So no comment.
We'll have to get
Jeff,
Michael.
what's your guess? Jeff has to guess.
Yeah, I think,
Predict, not guess.
I think the
Predict.
Post would stick with Eric Adams in that case and not Andrew Cuomo. And for possibly related reasons, I'm a Cuomo skeptic. I don't think he's going to run. Now, I'm not extremely confident in that. I think that, there's maybe a 70-30 chance he runs versus doesn't, or maybe even 60-40 he runs versus he doesn't run, whatever. I don't think he's going to run, but I wouldn't be shocked if he just decides to pull the trigger and run for mayor. I think running for governor in 2026 is more likely than mayor in 2025 for Andrew Cuomo.
Well, when and if those things happen, we will be reading all three of you on it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you for having us.
Gossip with you all day.
We will definitely have you back. Julie and I are going to do a second series in 25, and we're definitely going to have you guys on again.
I could have talked to them all day, Tom.
Yeah, that was fascinating. We have to have them back again soon.
I would love that. So thanks obviously to our guests. Thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of Tech in the Cities, How We Do It.
And we once again want to thank our sponsors and early supporters, Uber, Spectrum, Civic Hall, TikTok, Google, DoorDash, and Snapchat. And please like and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and iHeart, and tell us your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you next week at our next episode.
Can't wait.